Every empire that exists has to face many problems in its coming into being. These problems can be internal or external. Sometimes, small, wrong moves can make things very complicated for empires as big and influential as the Roman Empire. Hello, and welcome to the History Channel. Today, we will be talking about the Roman-Sabine Wars. These wars were between ancient Rome and their northern neighbors, the Sabine. Please watch till the end to know what was the cause and the result of these wars. Rome is regarded as one of history's most successful imperial nations. Over the course of centuries, Rome expanded from a little town on the Tiber River in central Italy to a massive empire that eventually encompassed England, all of continental Europe west of the Rhine and the Danube. The Romans rose to prominence through their military, political, and social structures. Unlike Greek city-states, which banned foreigners and subjugated peoples from political involvement, Rome included captured peoples into its social and political structure from the outset. Allies and subjects who accepted Roman customs were awarded Roman citizenship in the end. Before Rome, Italy was populated by people of diverse cultures and languages. The majority of the country's inhabitants resided in villages or small towns. They were mostly dependent on agriculture and livestock farming. Modern historical study is rapidly revealing how Rome's early growth happened in multicultural setting, impacted mainly by the higher civilizations of the Etruscans to the north and the Greeks to the south. The Etruscan ideas and practices influenced Roman religion. The recording of Rome's history began only after Rome had finished its conquest of Italy and was established as a great force in the ancient world. The Sabines communicated in Osco-Umbrian. Because they lived near the Tiber River and the Via Salaria, they had access to Etruria's and Latium's trading networks. They are also known as the Central Italian Ancients. They lived on Rome's Sabine hills, and a portion of the early Roman populace was Sabine in ancestry. The Sabines were divided into two divisions when Rome was created. The tribe separation was accepted as truth rather than a fable. Furthermore, the inhabitants of this tribe quickly reached Rome and mingled with the groups of people who were already living there. The other group chose to live in the mountains in order to preserve their tribal state. According to historians, the rape and abduction of the Sabine women occurred barely a few days after the establishment of Rome in the 8th century BC. During that time, Rome was a stable and strong city capable of repelling any force. However, the rising male bandits inhabiting the settlement presented a threat to the city's continued existence because it had few female citizens. Romulus, Rome's first king and the founder, became concerned about the consequent birth-to-death ratio and launched discussions with surrounding territories to persuade them to marry their women to Roman males. The discussions were a failure with all of the tribes and towns to whom they appealed. The Sabines, in particular, deteriorated since they dreaded the new Roman city's developing might. Romulus and his male followers committed crimes. The Romans intended to kidnap Sabine women from adjacent towns in order to populate their city with additional women who would marry the men and secure the city's heritage by bearing a new generation of strong males. They also held a few games to draw people from Rome's adjacent cities, such as Sabine, Canina, and Antimone. Romulus gave the signal to his troops during the feast, and they swiftly seized the Sabine ladies. Enraged by Romulus and his men's heinous deed, the armies of the betrayed outlying cities and towns stormed Roman territory. Canina's king marched his force to the outskirts of Rome. The Roman army confronted them. They were vanquished, however, after their king was assassinated in 752 BC. In the same year, Romulus and his troops celebrated a second triumph when the Antemnates aggressively entered the Roman territory in vengeance for the events that had occurred. They were likewise defeated, and Antemne fell and was captured by Romulus's army. King Titus Tatius of Sabine declared war on the Romans and launched an attack on Rome. The stronghold on Capitoline Hill was captured by King Titus and his army. Tarpeia, a Roman governor's daughter, deceived the Romans. She opened the city gates for Sabine forces, but died during the siege. The Roman army marched to the citadel but was beaten, and one of their most prominent leaders, Hostus, was killed. King Romulus then gathered his forces and personally led them back to the citadel to beat the Sabine army. The struggle between the Sabines and the Romans raged on for some time, but Romulus and his army looked to be on the approach to victory. Tired of the pandemonium, the Sabine women, headed by Romulus's wife and Titus's daughter, placed themselves between the two armies and requested that both lay down their arms. In a frantic attempt to save their dads and siblings, as well as their new spouses, the ladies hurled themselves among the swords and spears, accompanied by their children. The fight ended in a historical alliance between the two sides, thanks to the daring involvement of the Sabine women. The Romans and Sabines decided to become a unified country, and Rome was controlled jointly by King Romulus and King Titus Tatius. However, this was only the beginning of many more conflicts to come. King Tullus Hostilius was Rome's third king. Tullus lived during the mythical period whose records were lost in the 4th century BC, as did the other kings of Rome. A number of Roman merchants were captured by the Sabines at a market at the Temple of Feronia. The Sabines sought and secured the assistance of certain government volunteers who ultimately refused to assist them. Tullus invaded Sabine's land and met the Sabines near the militia forest. The Roman force was superior in infantry and cavalry, and the Roman cavalry had lately been reinforced. After a cavalry attack through the Sabines, the Romans won the fight. During their withdrawal, the Sabines suffered a high number of losses. Ancus Marcius was Rome's 4th king. The Latins started the conflict because they expected Ancus to continue his grandfather's religious pursuit of peace. Ancus effectively fought against the Latins. There is little known about his reign, but one thing is certain. In the 7th century BC, he celebrated victory over the Sabine and other Latins. Tarkinius Priscus was Rome's 5th emperor. The Sabines reignited the conflict by assaulting Rome. Tarquinius had planned to build a stone wall around Rome, but the Sabines, who had already crossed the Anio River, compelled him to abandon his preparations and prepare for an invasion. The initial combat saw a lot of bloodshed, but neither side was successful. The Sabines returned to their camp, giving the Romans time to raise more men. When the monarch realized his weakness, he quadrupled the number of riders in his army. The Sabine infantry pressed the Romans and appeared to be prevailing against the Roman center in the second battle. The Roman cavalry, on the other hand, surrounded the Sabine infantry, routing them and impeding their escape from the conflict. The Sabines were unable to flee with their lives due to the cavalry's pursuit, as well as the collapse of the bridge at their back. The citizens of Rome were confident in their victory and assumed victory even before the battle's conclusion was known. King Tarquinius advanced into Sabine territory with his army. The Sabines quickly assembled a new army, but were beaten once more. They then filed a peace suit. As a result, the Romans took control of the Sabine town of Calatia, as well as its surrounding territories and inhabitants. The fall of the Roman monarchy placed the Sabines in an awkward political situation in relation to Rome. Their treaties had been with the kings, but the kings were no longer present. In 505 BC, hostilities erupted once more between Rome and the Sabines. The Romans won, and the consuls were given a triumph. The next consular year saw an upsurge in violence. The Sabine menace prompted the election of several experienced consuls. Publius Valerius Poplicola and Titus Lucretius Tricepitinus were chosen consuls. The Sabines marched on Rome, but were halted by the Anio River and, presumably, the consular forces south of it. During the conflict, Attius Clausus relocated from Sabinum to Rome with all of his relatives and clients, including around 500 combat men. Claudius was elected to the Roman Senate, and the Sabines were granted citizenship, as well as a territory on the other side of the Anio. Claudius was a member of the Sabine group who advocated for peace with Rome, but when the war's side triumphed, he escaped from Regillium to Rome. Valerius learned of the hostile strategy through a Sabine defector and captives brought in by a Roman cavalry patrol. Lucretius was quickly advised. The attack occurred just after midnight. The Sabines were allowed to fill the ditch and build brushwood ramps over the wall into a deserted camp. Tarquin may have predicted the danger based on the absence of pushback to his accidentally noisy operations and the utter lack of sentinels. He interpreted the conditions to suggest that the Romans were all sound sleeping, a stunning miscalculation of his adversary. In reality, the Roman maniples were in formation and waited in the intervallum around the inner perimeter of the castra, which was completely dark. They could see enough to kill any enemy who came over the wall stealthily. The moon rose, revealing the bodies of the murdered, prompting the Sabines to abandon their swords and flee. The Roman forces all shouted simultaneously, since the ambush was no longer a surprise, which was the predetermined signal to Lucretius's men on the hill. The consuls entered Sabinum, devastated the enemy territory, beat them in combat, and triumphantly returned to Rome. The Fasti Triumphals only mention one victory, that of the consul Valerius. A skirmish broke out in Rome in 501 BC, instigated by a group of Sabine youths who attempted to capture a number of courtesans during the celebration of games in Rome. Titus Larcius was appointed dictator in order to avoid a conflict with the Latins. The Sabine emissaries sought peace, but the Romans rejected it, citing the Sabines' continual warfare against Rome. War was proclaimed, although no fight appears to have taken place. Tiberius Aemilius, consul of Rome at the time, was appointed leader of the Roman armies against the Sabines in 470 BC. It is uncertain when this conflict began. The Sabines remained in their camp and refused to attack the Roman army. Both sides fled after indecisive combat. Sabines destroyed Rome land all the way up to the city gates before being confronted and defeated by Roman soldiers. After 3 years of devouring the land, the Sabines marched into the area of the Latin town of Crustumerium. They walked along the banks of the Anio River until they arrived at Rome's Colline Gate. The Roman army, headed by Consul Quintus Servilius Priscus Stricturus, followed the Sabines and destroyed the Sabine territories for more wealth. Although there was no substantial fighting between the opposing troops, the war appears to have finished by this time. This was the end of the Roman-Sabine Wars. The Sabines still existed in the Roman Empire and also played a vital role in it, but as a whole community, the Sabine suddenly vanished from history. Thank you for watching our video. If you enjoyed the video, please like it and subscribe to our channel if you still haven't. Hit the notification button on your way out so that you get notified of our upcoming videos. See you next time.